All right, this is a lesson on understanding your God's consciousness. It took many years of research, but even more so, it took many years to get to this point to be able to speak live on YouTube. And so if you like what I'm saying, you can subscribe to the channel, like it or dislike it, it's fine. The message is not for everybody, but I'm coming straight out the Bible. I think this is one of two books that I read on a daily basis that I have to continue to read and understand, because I believe in my God's consciousness like I believe in the air that I breathe. And so this is not an attack on the Christian church, not even a religion. I just want to correct some things that have been misinterpreted over the years, and now has become a tradition, an American tradition, actually. And this is one of the last places that really started to understand the spiritual wisdom that was put into each and every one of us. Because the story goes that man is not a God, and I don't understand that. The Bible clearly tells us that man is a God. And you have these religious institutions that are pushing the agenda that man is not a God. And when I say man, I mean all. Because women, you are more important, not as important. You're more important than we are. Case in point, Eve, who was born of a virgin birth, just like Jesus, but that's a whole nother story. And I made a brief video about that, but now I'm pulling off all gloves. I'm going into the book. I'm gonna reveal to you a lot of things that were revealed to me along the way, because I had to go through a rebirth, and I'll touch on that in a second. But Eve came from the rib of Adam, allegedly. But what that story is really saying, if you look up the word rib or rabbi or reb or rebbe, it means master. And so Eve, that's why she was able to educate Adam, because remember, Eve was the one who so-called, as a god, so-called sin and went into this place of disobedience. Adam was number two. Eve was number one. So women, you are extremely important, more than you ever know. But society has done a number on all of us, and I understand. It took me many years. A lot of drugs, a lot of alcoholism, some penitentiary or prison. I've done it all. And it led me back to a place where I was supposed to be in the beginning. And I wasn't here before, because Christianity is a good religion if it's correctly taught. This Bible is not being taught correctly. And this is what I'm going to come on board and do. So every day about around 12 or 1 o'clock, I'm going to do about 15, 30 minutes, maybe 45, no more than an hour. And I want to talk to people and give you some better instructions, because this stuff that we doing today, we're dying senselessly. And I'm not talking about gang violence, the crime. I'm talking about the way that we eat, the way that we talk, the way that we think. In order to get to your God's consciousness, it's a principle. You have certain principles that you have to follow. Just like Eve followed those principles to become a god, we have to do the same thing. We're not mortals. From a social criteria or social guidelines, I'm black. There's nothing about my skin that resonates the color black. So spiritually, I don't identify with this, and I consider myself a very grounded spiritual being. And it took me a long time to get here, but I had to go through this rebirth. That's the conversation I want to talk about. Going through a rebirth is not being dipped in water. I understand what you go to your church every Saturday and Sunday and sometimes Wednesday and Friday, if I remember correctly, because I was dragged to one every single Sunday, Bible study. And so the rebirthing is more than just dipping you into water and saying a prayer in a name that has not been correctly defined. Nobody can define the name. Nobody can define the name Jesus. This Negro minister told it to this Negro minister. This Negro told it to this Negro minister. And before you know it, we just went on ahead and say, you know, with this base information, this base knowledge, I just don't want to go any further. So the rebirthing is so much deeper. And Jesus tells you about it in the book. If Jesus said in my favorite chapter, my favorite verse in the entire Bible, Jesus said that in John 10, verse 34 and 35, ye are all gods, verse 35. And if ye are all gods for whom the word of God came, then the scripture cannot be broken. But along the way, he was explaining to these people, you have to rebirth. It's not going back into the womb. Society has created a pattern, a path, because that's what it is. The sons of light created the path. That's another story. Because I'm going to explain how the gods came into existence. Because black man, if you think you're God, understand, and you are, it was somebody that came, it was a whole group of people that came before you. And you see them every day and don't even think about it. But I'll explain that. I'll go into that a little bit later. But this rebirthing, it's not going into the womb like Jesus said. It is a renewing of your mind, body, and spirit. I did a rebirth October 3rd, 2022. No, I'm sorry, October 3rd, 2021 is when I did my rebirthing. It is physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually draining. When I was done, when I woke up and I went into a meditation and I couldn't quite grasp going into the meditation that I'm normally used to going into. It requires that meditation I refer to as a journey. And when I couldn't get there about 20 minutes. And so I opened my eyes and my body started to go into this, my muscles were locking up. And I couldn't unlock my muscles, like I was going into a whole body cramp. My chest started to beat and started to hurt bad. I climbed out the bed. I couldn't even walk. I laid on the floor. Several minutes later, I found myself crying. Several minutes later, I found myself pleading to remove whatever this thing that was in my chest, pleading to get it removed out of me. And I kept saying, let go of me, let go of me. I didn't know what was going on. And this lasted for about an hour. When I was done, all I could do was crawl to the bathtub, turn on some cold water. It wasn't like super cold, but it was cold. And all I could do was lay in it up into my nose. And I couldn't stop crying. And then I understood as time went on, the message at the time was, it is your time. And I didn't understand any of it. So it took me 2 weeks to register it. But each and every day, I'm trying to approach life. I have this heavy request hanging over my head that I didn't quite understand. See, the water, the reason I told you that part of the story, because the water is what heals, is what starts to calm your body down. So now whatever information is coming through on the level that I received it, your entire body's going to receive it. There was a lot of things that I changed. I was a vegan. I became a vegetarian. I was a vegetarian, and I had been a vegan before I became a vegan. Don't eat as much. Had taken a lot of things out of my diet. Started thinking a lot differently and started becoming an independent thinker. And that was the biggest thing. Because we're raised in an environment, and as an African-American male, and America has the history that we do with regards to African Americans, parents will become helicopter parents. I was raised with a bully parent. pretty extreme. And because you want to protect your children from what's out there, but you can't. And protecting them, and protecting that child, you start to instill values in that child that reduces that child's identification, reduces that child's choice. And then as an adult, you begin to grow up and feel the same way if you don't break the connection. And that's what the rebirthing is about. It's like waking up. It's like waking up to the world for the first time. And you start hearing things that you never heard before, seeing things that you've never seen before. This is more than an ordination. I'm a hermeneutics minister, but I had been a hermeneutics minister prior to my rebirthing. And then once the rebirth came, everything started to make sense. See, you can't be what many of us call a grown-ass man or an adult or grown-ass woman until you understand this God's consciousness. Everything that you do outside of that, you do it as a codependent thinker for all of societal views, ideas, and values. If I ask most of you today, what is your value system? Many of you don't have an answer for it, unless you regurgitate what has already been said. A friend of mine called me right after I went through this rebirth, and I didn't explain anything. And so it came right after a fast too. And we were talking, and they asked me, this is during the time that there was a social influencer who I respect greatly. He's an ancestor now, he transitioned. And he talked about a high value man. So a friend of mine called and said, hey man, are you a high value man? And I'm just running on. I'm just trying to explain, yeah, I am. I didn't fit the criteria, but wasn't nobody gonna tell me that I'm not. Then I got off the phone and that message came. Why did you even partake in that? That has nothing to do with who you really are. That is a set pattern, that is a standard or a set pattern that people follow, but that's not who you are. So I had to continue to start taking breaks. I love the individual to death, my people who called and asked the question. But I had to start becoming an independent thinker. So I had to start breaking these patterns and these cords of behavior. People that say they love you, a lot of them is not necessarily about love, because we as human race don't understand love. And so it's not about loving you, it's about loving the way you make them feel. See, I would go around certain family members, and I was raised in a bully household, a household with it was strong parental bullying. And what I've learned is I want to be non-confrontational. That was my response to what was going on. I had spent so many years being angry, frustrated, fearful, and confrontational, aggressive. And then when I backed up off all of that, I said, oh, I'm starting to understand. So now my personality has started to form from my environment. And so I get around people that will get on the phone and say, hey man, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I'll stay on the phone with them for 4, 5, 6 hours out of a day. Not understanding. Like there's so many things wrong with that. I'll explain. And oh man, so many things wrong with that. I'll explain that in a second. But let me just finish in saying this. They love the way that you make them feel because most of them lack. So when you come around with your abandonment issues, with your people-pleasing issues, low self-esteem, very little to no value, your mind is not stable because you're codependent, because you've always been told what to do. And now you don't want to be told what to do because now you're angry. When you take all those, you make them feel better about the issues that they have not addressed in their life. So you can have a family member call you, or a friend call you, or a colleague, and just complain, gossip, judge, criticize, and give unwanted opinions about your life. And you'll sit on the phone and listen. Now they feel better about their love, and so it's much easier to love you. You've heard it before. We get in these movies, especially Hustle and Flow. I thought that was a really good movie to describe how abuse looks. We don't see it as abuse. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you some clues to some abusive communication, because I'm very critical about abusive communication today. See, when you're in your God's consciousness and you become aware, it's called self-awareness. Many of you all know. You have to be methodical, you have to be patient, and you have to be focused on all decisions that you make in your life. You have to know why you're making them, how it's going to happen, and how you're going to move in them to make them happen or to achieve the goal. So you don't need anybody who's taking from you, taking your energy, taking your time, taking your ideas, which is all very precious because you only hear once. Then you come back as you forget about everything else unless you go through like a regressive therapy, and some certain meditations will open you up as well. So these people will come along even after you made a decision and you share your decision with that person. And this person say, well, why are you doing that? That's the X right there. What you doing that for? That's another X. Because what they're saying, not implying, what they're saying is, I don't trust you to make the decisions that you make. And I don't trust that you have it within you to make a decision. And for that reason, I got to question everything that you do. Well, it's nobody's fault but yours for sharing it. For sharing it with a person that didn't value in the very beginning. I was talking to a person. Here's a word here's a comment that I don't like. When a person asks you a question about your personal business, and they could be demanding, and I know you all have had it because I've had it many times. What's up with you? Not much. Come on, man. It ain't even about nothing. Tell me. And you're like, then they're demanding your business. Look at the respect in that. That's like me walking into a store and telling them what I want, grab it, and walk on out. Because I don't respect the business. But I got a call, it was yesterday, and I told the young lady something about, in a conversation, and she asked me about my personal business. This was about business. This was about nothing personal. And I said, well, why are you asking me that? And she said, oh, because I'm just curious. And I had to catch myself. Because let me explain something to you. When someone asks you why about your business, it's never about curiosity. Please do not buy that lie. I don't even want to talk to anybody after that, because you cannot be honest in a conversation. It's not because you question any of my decisions is based on 5 reasons only: comments, criticism, judgment, unwanted opinion, or gossip. That's it. And they'll deny it to the bitter end. But understand, when a person starts to ask you about your personal business, they're still in a certain mind frame, because as a God, you don't move like that. And when you're in your God's consciousness, you don't move like that. It is said in the book. Eve didn't reiterate it enough, although in my opinion, Eve's wisdom is a lot easier to understand. And I guess I don't want to lose you in this. Eve and Jesus' stories are so similar that they're practically one and the same. And I know you're probably looking like, okay, let me click him off. Hold on. Before you click me off, let me give you a few similarities to show you. I told you early on that Eve was born of a virgin birth, just like Jesus. Eve ate from a so-called tree and died. Jesus hung from a tree and died. The gods told Eve, if you eat from this tree, you're going to die. And the serpent, who I don't understand, why would he help the enemy? That's like me giving you a gun and say, now let's fight. So now the serpent is helping the enemy and saying, you'll be able to see as the God. See, you'll be a God. No, you won't die. You're a God. You'll become a God. And Eve did it. That was a matter of choice. And in my opinion, one of the best. Because when she did it, she died. Because what did God say? The God said, you're going to die. And she did. And once she died, she became a living God. And if you remember in Genesis chapter 3, verse 22, Lord God said, behold, the man has become one of us. Now, somebody is not telling the truth. It's either going to be 10 million churches nationwide, probably 100 million, depending on if we count them all in the inner city. And all you have to do is just go next to the liquor store. It'll be one. Not all of them, but most. So the gods had already said it. So somebody's not telling the truth. It's either those 10 million churches or it's the book. Well, I can tell you, it's not the book. So Eve's transformation, in my opinion, was a little bit easier to understand from a physiological perspective. Jesus, there's a lot of other stories and allegories, how he fed the fish, and that's a true story, but not in the context that it has presented from a Judeo-Westernized practice or belief system. But I'll talk about that more too. But let me go back to some more of the similarities. Eve was in the Garden of Eden. Jesus went to the sepulcher or the cave. Now, if you look up cave, if you look up cave, that's the nickname for the pineal gland. This is why you have to incorporate physiology or occult chemistry as one of the people who I've researched and have educated me along the way. The pineal gland is electric and the pituitary gland is magnetic. Now, the pituitary gland in our language is considered the master gland. Hence, the rabbi wanted to just bring them two together. Also, Jesus was on the mountain when he ran into Satan. Eve was in the Garden of Eden when they ran into a serpent identified as Satan. And I've repeated this in a few of my other videos, but I got to repeat it again because we're not making sense. We're just listening to what the churches say and head on. But today, I said I'm starting Bible study. I haven't even picked up the book and got started, but we will. If not tomorrow, surely Monday. If not Sunday, that might be a good day. Sunday at between 12 and 1. So let me go back to this. Eve and Jesus' story was so closely related that here's what was given to me, that Jesus came and reiterated the story that was told before. Jesus was the head or the master or the teacher of 12 disciples. How many nations was Eve a mother of? 12. And then we get into the story of Jacob because that's another part of the story. So you constantly have people are telling us how to move into our God's consciousness. What we're not taking into consideration is, well, the book has been, before we get into the 127,000 translations from 1611 to today, let me take you back before 1611, because before 1611, this was considered a magic book. It was the sacred text. And you literally can turn a page, go to Psalms, and perform a magic trick based on the language it was written in: Aramaic, Hebrew, Latin. And so the Sons of Light taught several of the humans, and those humans became masters. This is how I want you to teach the community, because we got to keep control, because the Sons of Light are the ones that created the path. It wasn't a path prior to. And the Sons of Light had somebody to address. And that group of beings deals with the infinite consciousness that we all called God. So what happened between how this book was rewritten because of this. When the Sons of Light put together the book was a magic book. It was a sacred text. And then the Sons of Light, they taught them how to teach the general public. And some of the messengers, during their meditation, they got a visit from those that created the Sons of Light. Because the Sons of Light understood the power, but the Sons of Light also understood that they had will and choice to do something different. And that's what they did. They created a path. They took the all-existent energy and put it in right here, and created the energy and formed and trained and conditioned and educated the energy to flow on the path. And when those messages, I refer to them at this moment as celestial beings. When those messages came to the messengers, they said, you can't keep doing this. This is incorrect. We'll do everything we can to hold them off. But this is the way that this text is written. So if you're going to teach it, this is the way this text has to be taught. So a lot of the masters weren't with it, but most of them were. And they started to teach it. And when the Sons of Light realized this, they came along and destroyed all the masters. And then you start talking about this flood, which is a metaphor. It's no more than a metaphor. And I'll explain it later on. And when the Sons of Light came and they realized that, they had to rewrite this book, and then they destroyed, and then they evolved into a secret society, because now they had to be separate, and they had to entrust a different doctrine. They had to entrust a newly written doctrine with a different group of humans. Human. Hueman. Human, Hu only means ground. So when it was rewritten, and a few masters that were able to escape went up underground, and they continued to teach it the way that the celestial beings taught them. And once the book was rewritten, now it was greenlighted. It became a lot fluffier. There's a lot of information missing because it's just too much. And then they start putting in all of these allegories and changing the names, because those names were vital. It is said that once you mention the infinite consciousness, the infinite existence of all, when you mention that name, you could die if you were not chosen to mention the name. Yod He Vav He, YOD HEVAUHE. And that name is broken down. That name is inside the Bible as well. I'll show it to you. So in order to get into your God's consciousness, you got to push back from, and I'm telling you the story because after that, look what society has become. We haven't even begun to sift through the layers of lies, hypocrisy, bloodshed, anger. We're split. Not only are we split as a racial group, as humanity, but we're split with even in ourselves. We don't even know who we are. You have preachers that are telling you that you're not a God, and they cannot explain it. It's a white guy. I had this video because I was gonna put it on YouTube and chop him up, and I still might consider doing that. He said, "No, you're not gods. You're not God." Jesus was talking to the judges and the magistrates who were appointed by God. Well, I have a question of the God that y'all teaching anyway, because the God that you all are teaching humanity is angry, hateful, vengeful, will fight your battles. As spiritual beings, we don't need our battles fought. We only need our battles fought because we live in a world of conditions where bloodshed and battle goes on. None of this makes sense. Nobody can offer me an accurate explanation on how did this Lucifer, for which his name is not his name is not the way it's been described. How is this Lucifer evil? When in Latin, Lux or LVX means light. And in Arabic, Sifr, S-I-F-R. That's Lucifer. Sifr means something out of nowhere. And that's what light did. G. Carey said it best, and I thought it was phenomenal. Darkness adopted illumination in order to make itself visible. So essentially what you're saying is God created all love, embracing, beautiful human beings that knows nothing about evil. And he has this most beautiful angel. Essentially what you're telling me is God has a little bit of hate in him in order for him. That's another issue. God has some form of hate within his existence that he created, that angel was created that turned evil. The only reason why we act the way we act because it is the condition in the society that we live in. This has nothing to do with who we are spiritually. Just like Eve didn't commit a sin because sin does not mean death. Sin creates death, if you understand the definition of death. I'm going to give you a definition of death, and I'll give you a definition of sin in another lecture. The definition of death is immortality, moving away from life. Eve showed us how to do it, which supports the definition. Jesus revealed it as well. He illustrated it. Immortality, your infinite consciousness, moving away from the physical realm. Immortality, moving away from life. And to all you preachers and teachers out there, you have to answer this. How is it that God can blow the breath into man and make man a living being? And man is not a God. That's God particle. That's God's consciousness. Whether you want to call it a quark, proton, atom, neutron, electron, I don't care what you want to call it. But that which created all things is within me. And that breath, remember, he blew the breath of life into Adam, and Adam became a living man. Adam was dirt prior to, or a living being. Adam was dirt from prior to. Adam didn't have, if you want to go with the story, if you have dirt, it doesn't have an identity until the breath was blown into man. So if this object doesn't have an identity, and I give it something in order to bring life to the object, I don't care what you call the object is always going to be part of me and I part of the object. That doesn't make sense. But I wanted to touch on 27. I looked this up and I said, oh no, I got to share this. Now, listen to this, because you all will say that this infinite and all-loving and existing consciousness, this is why I like George Carlin. George Carlin was an atheist along with some other people, because the Judeo-Westernized religion could not and did not describe this God. When you read the Bible, all you're reading is an interpretation of how someone viewed or interpreted this infinite consciousness. For me, listen, I use God and I use infinite consciousness because those that will hear it will hear it. But you hear me using several names because I have yet to come up with a name to identify this existence. We can call it the matrix, which in Greek means mother. We can call it infinite consciousness, God, the God particle, the breath, which in Greek means mind, and in Latin it means spirit. So all that's intertwined. I'm gonna really get into that in the very beginning of Genesis, in the beginning. And so I came up with some of my own interpretations of the name. Call them unconditional. I call this power unconditional presence. Unconditional power, cosmic energy, which I thought was a phenomenal term. Cosmic energy, creative intelligence. I'm still sifting through to try to identify, how do I identify this God's consciousness other than in unlimited and endless power? I don't know what to call it. So when you read the book, you're just reading a portion. If you go deep into a meditation, you can write like this, because your interpretation of a God would be similar to these people because they were pretty accurate. Now, mind you, no Europeans came up with this. This goes back much further. This is where Alexander the Great, or the Great, depending on if I offended you, I'm sorry. This is where Alexander the Great got his information, and they had to toss so much of it out. At the Library of Om, O-U-M. See, Africa would have been well established way before the Latins came, the Italians came through there. And here's Christopher Columbus, which real name is Cristobal Colon. We can go on and on with that. But I'm trying to explain to you this book. So when you talk about people interpreting God, these are just interpretations, and then pretty good ones, because it goes back, and the core of the information is still there. You just got to go behind the allegories and the parables and the metaphor and the analogies to get to it. Now, I was talking about people talking about a rageful God, an angry God, a vengeful God. A God don't function like that. In the book of Genesis, it even said God hated. One of the two worst words in all of humanity. So if God hated, I would say, well, yeah, it's possible he could have created Satan. But here it is right here in Proverbs 27, verse 4. It says, wrath is cruel and anger outrageous, but who is able to withstand before envy? So it's telling you that wrath is cruel and anger. How are we attaching our God's consciousness or infinite consciousness to the rhetoric? To a hateful God, a vengeful God. If I had to hear that and didn't dig into this book, I would be an atheist as well. But this goes back to the pattern of thinking that I've constantly kept moving. And I'm going to relate it to the story. I spent 13 months in Alabama. I was gone before my car could leave, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And I was listening to a Dr. King speech on YouTube. And he said, Alabama is vicious racism. And it clicked. And then I began to understand why these people function the way that they did. It was a very small town. And the mind of the people was about the size of the town, if not smaller. They couldn't think outside of the town. And what I noticed and was able to understand is that these people function from low expectations of certain cultures. And the history of the state is just what it is. And what has happened is there hasn't been a changing of the mindset. This is where the nigger word comes from. The nigger word means about as much as a fly on the shoe. But the only reason why it has so much traction in in American language is because it's still following a 200, 300, 400-year-old history. And this is what I'm saying about the book and the teachings. You all are following the same history, a 300, 400-year history, if not longer. The book isn't saying anything that the churches are telling you is saying. So I'm about to close this out. I'm going to start around 12 o'clock tomorrow. And I'm going to start on the story of Eve. And I'm going to talk about the original gods, the gods that we see and do not acknowledge. And I learned this information, it was given to me. Whenever I go into a meditation, my God's consciousness begins to take over and begin to feed me information, and I download the information. And for many years, I was in fear of even talking about it because I know what happens to one that goes against the social order, right? And I said, it may not be that deep, or I have no idea. But there are 6 basic fears, according to Napoleon Hill. And one of those fears is the fear of death, of dying. And in one of my meditations, and I'll explain that meditation some other time, because it took me into a place that I identified as a heaven. And the reason I'm cutting, I keep saying I'm going to tell, because not only do I want to extend my videos, but it's also, I don't want to just throw a bunch of stuff because I'm loaded. I'm locked and loaded. I haven't had a legitimate conversation like this with anybody in about 2 years, maybe about 3 times in 2 years. I don't answer my phone. I don't do any of that. I'm focused on this mission now. So with that being said, I'm going to close this out, but along the way, I'm going to talk and I'm going to teach this Bible. If you really want to get to your God's consciousness, I was talking about the death thing. Yeah, fear of death. I have no fear of it. I have no fear. I have no, because I understand how evolution works, spiritual evolution. You don't leave. You don't leave. You just come out of this shell and move into a whole nother realm of consciousness. And that realm of consciousness, there's no description. I can explain it, and yet I would still do an injustice attempting to put it into words. So the 6 basic fears. I also teach The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. He talks about the 6 basic fears. And I'm going to tag team this book because that's the second book that I read, the 2 most important books that I read on a daily basis. And my life has changed. 2 years ago, October 3rd, 2021, the day before that, I couldn't get out of bed. I spent months just using the bathroom, eating a little bit, and laying down. I couldn't do anything else. My mind wouldn't allow me. My body wouldn't allow me. And when I went through my rebirth, there was nothing involved but meditation and my willingness to receive and to listen and to move on what it was I was told. And that's when I understood that I'm in my God's consciousness. So there's a lot of things now I've had to disconnect from my past for the purpose of my future. Now I can breathe, because understand this, with my time in prison, and I look at society today, about 80% of them are freer than you are. And that's a heavy thing to say. Bola Zoff wrote a book, I read it years ago, called We're All Doing Time. And we are doing time. This rebirth gives you the ability to become an independent thinker. You have a stable mind. You'll have a value system. You'll have a value system that would just make you cry. Like, where is this kind of personality developing from? Well, you've always been that. You just wasn't paying attention or listening when you were talking. And so many, your whole entire life changes. I really couldn't even fast after about 3-4 days. I did a 21-day fast after that. And everything, the whole universe opened up at that time. And now I understand. So with that being said, see you all tomorrow, about 12 o'clock. And we're going to do this again. And I don't know if I'm going to get to the book of Genesis. Well, yeah, I will. I'll get to the book of Genesis, but I want to talk about the first set of gods that were here. And then we moved into the story having to be retold, because those gods crossed the line. Eve didn't cross the line. Those gods crossed the line according to the sons of light that created the path. All right, peace.